There you go.
How's that?
That's great.
So you can hear me now.
Yeah, you
You
know.
couldn't hear me before, but you said yes. I don't know about you guys.
We like
We always say yes.
This is the best audience we could get in the storm. I want to echo what Ben said earlier. Thank you all for coming out and braving this ferocious weather. We got a phone call at 10 this morning from a friend saying, I can't come out, the storm is so terrible. And it was sunny in our yard at that moment.
Microclimates.
Microclimates, you're the brave people. So thanks for coming, we really appreciate your support. Before I start my story, I just want to share something that's been going on. It's a crazy world, isn't it? I mean, I was watching the news and just thinking, this is, what's happened to our world? And it reminded me of a song that immediately took up a residency inside my head. It's an earworm. A song from the 50s about something like this. And just change a few names and it sounds very familiar. Sing along with me if you know this. They're rioting in Africa. Ba, 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 ba. They're starving in Spain. Ba, 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 ba. They're banning books in Florida. Ba, 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 ba. And Texas needs rain. Ba, 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 ba. The whole world is festering with unhappy souls. The French hate the Germans. The Germans hate the Poles.
South Africans.
No. The Italians hate Yugoslav, South Africans hate the Dutch, and I don't like anybody very much. So that's from the Kingston. Thank you. Not known for my singing. That's from the Kingston Trio, but it was actually written by Sheldon Harnick, who also wrote Fiddler on the Roof. Who knew? The theme for today's stories is Working It. And what does that song have to do with it? Nothing. It's just been my earworm and now it's stuck inside my head. The theme is Working It, and when we chose that theme, we really liked the fact that there were several possible meanings that you could put to it. Working It could mean using your good qualities to your advantage. It could mean manipulating other people, or it can refer to jobs and work. And the story I'm going to tell you today is a work story based on my years as a cinematographer. There's some people in it you'll recognize. And it's also a family story, and you'll see why. And it's also a dog story. Now, dogs make really perfect pets, in my opinion. And one of the wonderful things about dogs is most dogs revel in eye contact. And many people revel in eye contact. And it turns out that both humans and dogs secrete oxytocin, known as the love drug. Seriously, we all secrete oxytocin. And that's the source of that warm, happy feeling you get when you look in the eyes of your lover or your dog. And that's why your dogs stare at you lovingly so much. If you have a dog, you find out the one design flaw about dogs, and that's that they have such short lifespans. If you find a spouse, a person you want to spend the rest of your life with, you could probably spend most of your life with that person. If you fall in love with a dog, unless you're getting on in years, it's probable that you'll outlive that dog, and maybe more than one dog. Anyway, the story is called Dog Years. I called Mom on my cell phone as my film crew set up around me. Hi, I'm in Bill Clinton's office in New York. Yeah, we're setting up to interview him for the West Wing documentary. I want to sit behind his desk on his chair, but I'm afraid that the touch of my tush on his chair is going to set up some kind of Secret Service anti-groupie alarm, and armed agents with Uzis are going to come in and grab me and drag me off to some dungeon never to be seen again. Or maybe not. Yeah, I want to sit in his chair, but I'm a little afraid to. Yeah, no, we're not talking to him about politics. It's about the culture of working in the White House. It's very different. My crew's starting to work, and I finally do sit down very carefully. Okay, I'll see you in Pop tomorrow. Tell Pop that I'll see him around noon tomorrow, and tell him where I called you from. Bill Clinton's office. A few weeks earlier, our dog Sophie, our family pooch, was really in a bad way. Her systems were breaking down. We knew the end was near. 13 was a lot of dog years. She got up from a nap and she was very unsteady and she wobbled around and then she messed herself and she was so mortified. This was the dog who never had an accident. She was so mortified by this that she staggered out the back door and she stumbled down the stairs to the backyard. And I watched in horror as she disappeared under the deck, because I knew that under the deck was not only a lot of mud, but also an open hatch that led to under the house. And frankly, I was afraid that Sophie was going to climb under there and die. And I dove into the mud under the house, under the deck, and I squirmed forward as fast as I could. And I grabbed our 90-pound black boxer lab mutt and pulled her out from the hatch before she could get under there. And when I let go of her to close the hatch, she wriggled away from me to the other end of the deck where I couldn't reach her. Sometime later that day, she came inside. But the next day I had a funny feeling, and I went over to her bed and she lay motionless there, the light gone from her eyes. In the living room, our grandfather clock, the clock that my dad had built for us, the grandfather clock struck 12. Now he was immobilized in a hospital in Phoenix after a massive stroke, and Sophie was dead. Bill Clinton told us that he loved being president and that he felt more optimistic after 2 terms than he did when he started. He also shared that apparently he and his close advisor, James Carville, were both eligible to run for president of France. Apparently Carville, who was born in Louisiana, and Clinton, born in Arkansas, both parts of the original Louisiana Purchase, which we bought from France, because they were born in former French colonies, they could, under French law, move to France, establish residency, and run for office. I don't think I'll do that, said Clinton. He said, I think I take a lot of flack for my French accent. And he was right. The next day I went to see Pop in the hospital in Phoenix. Now my dad, who was nearly 90 at this point, and that's a lot of dog years. My dad was something of a Renaissance man. He was an accomplished artist and writer and photographer, the kind of guy who could teach or explain or build or repair anything. Author of over 30 books on crafts and hobbies in the outdoors. A tough act to follow, it's tough to be the son of a Renaissance man. But now he lay, the man who could do everything, lay helpless in a bed in the hospital, incontinent, lost some of his vision and some of his hearing, fed by a tube, barely able to move. It was sad to see him, but I was happy to get to visit, and I was glad that I had the opportunity to tell him about the West Wing documentary that I've just come from working on. I said, yeah, we just interviewed Bill Clinton in New York, and next week we're going to Palm Springs to talk to Gerald Ford. Ford, huh? He said, despite everything, with a twinkle in his eye. He said, you know, they named a theater after him. I said, Ford's Theater where Lincoln was shot. I don't think you have your timeline exactly right. But he chuckled and he was happy that I'd gotten his corny joke. Dear President Clinton, I wrote a letter. I was the cameraman, the tall guy behind the director during the interview you did for the West Wing in your office. This, which incidentally was the first major TV interview that Clinton had done since he'd left office the year before. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you, as well as Presidents Carter and Ford and Secretary Kissinger in the course of shooting this documentary. I'm writing to offer my condolences on the death of your dog, Buddy. After Clinton's interview, I wanted to make a connection with him because I knew that his family had lost their dog recently, and I wanted to talk to him about it. But the woman who catered our shoot had a lot to say to Clinton about George W. Bush, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. So I offered my condolences and I said, my family recently went through the same kind of loss. Our pooch, Sophie, died in March at age 13, and the house feels very empty without her. She was big and black, a boxer lab mix, scary looking but meek as a lamb, and great with kids. My wife and I always walked Sophie to school with our 2 sons. Children we didn't know would come up to us on the street, greet Sophie by name, and exchange a scratch behind the ears for a wet down. She had a prodigious tongue and a thick, whip-like tail. Together they made for an intense licking and wagging experience, especially when she was happy, which was most of the time. We scattered Sophie's ashes at sunset at the dog park on San Francisco Bay, where she spent many happy hours. Then we spent the evening digging through old photos and movies of our family growing up with her. Laughing and spending time together helped our family heal the hurt of losing her. That's what I wish I'd told you at the time we met. I hope you're able to have some peace about losing Buddy. Remember the good times and the wonderful, unconditional love that only dogs and precious few humans practice regularly. If you do run for president of France, I wish you the best of luck. You can always work on your French accent. With best wishes, Bill Zarchi.
Oh, cool. Great job, Bill.
Thank you. Am I done? 2 days before the West Wing documentary aired on NBC, and this was a major feather in my cap professionally, getting to shoot a network primetime documentary, which was very unusual for someone in this market. If you look at movie credits, there's often a dozen or a few dozen or sometimes hundreds of people listed in the credits, and usually just one director of photography. And that means it's very competitive, and most of those shows get crewed out of Hollywood and New York, markets that I never penetrated. So it was unusual for me to get to do this. 2 days before the show aired on NBC, Pop passed away in Phoenix. I was sad, of course, and disappointed that I didn't get to, that he didn't live long enough to see our show, but I was glad that I got the opportunity to tell him about it. I watched the show with my wife and kids and a couple of close friends, and I burst into tears when I saw my credit at the beginning of the show, director of photography, over a beautiful aerial shot of the White House that I actually didn't shoot myself. I was happy that I'd gotten to tell Pop about the show. 4 months later, 4.5 months later, I got a letter in the mail, embossed presidential seal, William Jefferson Clinton. Dear Bill, thank you for the kind letter you sent to me after the filming of the West Wing documentary. I was so touched by it and regret that I was unable to respond sooner. I was sorry to learn about the loss of your dog, Sophie. While our family has a new puppy now, I still miss Buddy very much. He will always hold a special place in my heart, which, as a fellow dog lover, I know you understand. It was a great pleasure for me to participate in the West Wing special episode, and I'm grateful for all you did to make it such a success. I'm glad you took the time to write and send you my best wishes. Sincerely, Bill Clinton. So much had happened since that day in Clinton's office. The West Wing documentary won a Primetime Emmy for an outstanding special class program, beating out an I Love Lucy special and an episode of Survivor.
Tough competition.
For myself, in a very profound way, I was starting to diversify my interests and activities. My dad had always done many, many different things, and I'd always been very single-minded about my career as a cinematographer. And something about losing him and my maturing, I started to do other things. New opportunities were opening up for me in writing and teaching. A friend of mine who had recently lost his father said, "You know, Bill," he said, "I find more of myself." He said, "I find more of my dad in myself every day. So in a way, you have more of your father to look forward to, rather than less." And a cousin who hadn't seen my parents in many years saw a picture of me with my kids and wife, and she said, "Billy, you look just like your dad did at that age," or so she remembers. Like the Clintons, we moved on, and we got another puppy, a timid, neurotic rescue mutt named Montana, who was afraid of other people, afraid of dogs, afraid of her own shadow, literally afraid of her own shadow, afraid of the wind and the sun. But we lavished her with unconditional love and affection. And that's how we keep Sophie in our hearts. Thank you.